My name's Tammy Brunner. I'm the Register of Deeds here in Wake County. And I just want to thank you and tell you how excited we are to give you this information we're about to give you, and just excited that you took time out of your life to be here today. In 2021, the Office of the Register of Deeds kicked off a project called the Enslaved Persons Project. In that project, we documented and indexed every deed in our office that had anything to do with people being bought, sold, gifted to other folks. The turnout and the excitement over that project led us to creating another project along the same lines, because the community was so excited to do the work and have the information at their hands. I had heard about other states that had taken the time to go into their books and pull out all of their restrictive covenants. I wish I could tell you that this was my idea and that no one has ever done this before, but it's not. I stole it completely. I just believed strongly that these covenants, once we pulled them all out and mapped them out, that what we would learn is that the underserved parts of Wake County, we created these underserved parts of Wake County. They're the same underserved parts of Wake County that were created back in the early 1900s. To all the volunteers that are here, you're the reason we're here today, and I'd love for you to take a minute and stand up so that we can praise you and thank you for the work that you did. We really appreciate you taking the time and caring about this subject as well. These are difficult documents to read. They're difficult on many levels. But you pushed through and you found all of them, and I just thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I know that Lisa is going to thank you from the bottom of her heart. And if you have time before you leave, please make sure that you meet Bob and Lisa. They would like to meet you face to face. I am blessed to work for Wake County. I'm blessed to work for a group of commissioners that support the work that we do across the county, and they support most of the visions that I have for the Office of the Register of Deeds. When we presented this information to the county commissioners a couple of weeks ago, they were really interested in what we were going to do with the information once we had it. When I asked about someone speaking at this event, Vice Chair Don Mial was very eager and ready to speak. Don and I have known each other a long time, long before we became elected officials, and I've always known that Don and I agree on most everything when it comes to change that needs to happen in our community. So I'm not going to take more time, but Don, I'd love for you to come up. But first, I just want to thank you for always standing up for your community and trying to make a difference in Wake County.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Tammy, for the great introduction. As Tammy indicated, we have known each other quite some time. I hate to say how long it's been that we have known each other, but more importantly, you know, it's for what we are here for. And so I want to start out and say thanks to Bob and Lisa, you know, for your great work. And good afternoon. As I indicated, I'm Don Mial. And before I forget, I want to make sure I remember to acknowledge one of my colleagues, Commissioner Cheryl Stallings. You know, it's so thankful for the hard work in documenting Wake County's history. You know, as I tell folks, I'm probably the only one that's left, maybe two. I see a couple other people here that I know that grew up here in Wake County as well. There's not a whole lot of us left that actually were born and grew up here in Wake County. You know, and being that, it's very meaningful to me for the work that was done and what you guys have put together here. So with that, you know, all jokes aside, you know, when a lot of this information came about, you know, before the 1950s, yeah, I was not born yet. However, I always say, I'm young enough to remember and old enough to have experienced some of the things that people have gone through here in Wake County over the years. Unfortunately, I've also seen the destruction and impact of race-based discrimination. You know, I grew up out in the eastern part of the county, and I worked on a family farm in Shotwell. I don't know how many of you guys know where that area is, but, family out there. And so we had time to spend out there on the farm, with my dad and grandparents and my uncles and all them. Because, growing up on the farm, it took the whole family in order to make that farm operate. We were sharecroppers, but at some point, around the 6th grade, my family, my grandparents were still there on the farm. We moved to Raleigh. And during that time, my brother, my sister, and I, we attended Daniels Middle School. That was in the early to late 60s. And it was during a period of time right after school became integrated. At that particular time, the three of us attended Daniels. And there were about 22, maybe 25 African-American students that were attending Daniels. And my brother and my sister and I were 3 of that group. So you could see the impact that it would have had. But more importantly, what was taking place at that particular time, according to, Dr. King was killed or assassinated in 1968. And during that period of time, because of the effect that it had on us as kids at a predominantly white school, we were afraid to go to school the next day, not knowing what effect it was going to have on us. And that was type of things that you experienced, because, with the nation outcry and the riots, we just didn't know what we were going to expect or what we were going to experience. So as I indicated, we stayed home. Then, of course, for high school, then we transferred and went back to an all-black school, which attended J.W. Ligon High School. And, of course, I'm happy to say, and sorry to say all at the same time, my class was the last class to graduate from J.W. Ligon. And also, growing up here in Raleigh, we went to Chavis Park. There was Pullen Park, and there was also other places that people went to swim, like Hayes Barton. Well, because of the racial atmosphere and the discrimination of things that were taking place at the time, we could not go to those other parks during that particular time. And also there were parts of Wake County that we would refer to today as sundown towns or sundown areas because of the racial makeup that we were afraid at certain time, that you could not be in those particular areas. And that's what this new catalog of the county's racially restricted covenants would help us connect those experiences with the policies that produce those types of situations. This project and the interactive map that's been built together is just awesome. As Tammy indicated, that came through, you guys came before the board and did a great presentation with us. And of course, I had the opportunity to visit another period of situation, a meeting that you guys had, which was very much appreciated in the information that was put out. So this map will help students, historians, residents, and policymakers understand where we came from. And it will help them chart a better course for where we are going. Great thinkers from all over the world have said some versions of those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. There's also an African word about the power of knowing your own history. It's Sankofu. And Sankofu from a Guyanian tribe, it roughly translates to, it's not wrong to go back, but what you have forgotten. So again, thank you for going back for what many have forgotten. I am just in awe of what this community can do when we come together. Your skills and the use of new technology are truly incredibly impressive. And I'm also grateful to our registered deed for the great work that she have done. And Tammy, you guys worked together to pull all this data together. And having done some research over the years myself, I know it was not an easy task when you start looking at some of the books and stuff that goes back to the 17 and 1800s, and some probably before that. So with that, it's empowered this group of volunteers to make this project a success. So if you have served our community well, and we thank you for it. And more importantly, as I always like to say, I am you, you are we, and we are Wake County. Thank you.
I want to read this. I don't want to try to do it without my notes because I want to make sure that I say exactly what I want to say about Bob and Lisa. We're now onto the main stage, the reason that you're here. I won't take much of your time because I know you're here for the map and for the data, but I just have a few things to say about the project coordinators that are about to walk up here and impress you, move you, and blow you away with the findings. I simply and factually could not have found better folks to manage this project. Their dedication, their commitment, their knowledge, and their work ethic are unmatched. They're not only good at what they do because they care, but they are just some of the best people I've ever had the pleasure of building a relationship with. Lisa Boccetti and Bob Williams, it's all you. Let's go. Once the presentation has been completed, we'll take questions, so please save your questions till the end.
Well, good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to unveil and celebrate the culmination of over a year of work on the restrictive covenant real estate deeds from the Wake County Register of Deeds office. Thank you so much for being here on this rainy weekday. It's such a joyous and emotional time for us to be able to celebrate together what we've achieved over the last year or so. For us, it has been the privilege of a lifetime to work shoulder to shoulder with you on this project. We need to recognize that none of our work would have been possible at all without the generations of meticulous work by ROD staff to process and maintain these precious records. Their service, their dedication, their expertise, their institutional knowledge over many decades has given us a treasure trove of primary source documents to help tell our story of what Wake County has been, why it is what it is today, and what it has the potential to become. So thank you to our ROD staff. Now, all of this got started as an outgrowth of the Enslaved Persons Project, People Not Property, which was also based on the deeds housed in the Wake County ROD office. Register of Deeds Tammy Brunner has a strong commitment to making sure the residents of Wake County have access to the gorgeous longitudinal database of documents housed and maintained by that office. These primary source documents record the story of our community in a unique, powerful, and nuanced way. And under Tammy's leadership and stewardship, they are revealing that story to all of us. Just a quick recap of the history of the project for those of you who may be new to it. I read deeds for the Enslaved Persons Project, and when it was over, I asked Tammy to call me if she ever had anything else going. And one day she called and said, "What do you know about covenants?" And I said, "Not much." But I read Crabgrass Frontier by Kenneth Jackson and Richard Rothstein's Color of Law, and I signed on. And then during one of our conversations about what the project might look like, Tammy said, "What I really want is a map. I want a map." And I said, "I know somebody who can make you a map." And without calling home, I signed Bob up right on the spot. And he never turned a hair. And that was the end of last September or so, and we've been working on it together with you ever since. The work process for the covenants had to be different from the slave deeds because of the sheer volume of material. There are about 600,000 pages of documents in the ROD files for the time period of interest from about 1905 to 1950. Far too many to read one by one, as was possible for the slave deeds. Bob was able to scan and search those documents using AI, and he identified 20,000 deeds of interest. 20,000 needles in that 600,000 document haystack that contained racially charged language. Then, with the help of all of you, we read and indexed and reviewed those 20,000 deeds and identified 15,000 of them that did in fact contain racially restrictive covenants. Statistical analysis shows that we can be confident we have found and indexed over 95% of Wake County's covenants. The process Bob designed is straightforward, flexible, elegant, and replicable. We have documented the process, and are making it available to other jurisdictions for use in their own areas of interest. So what a guy, right? We had no idea that within an hour of issuing a press release containing a call for volunteers, that we would be frantically responding to around 200 community members. You guys just about killed us at the beginning. People from all walks of life, law students from NC Central and UNC, an entire history class from NC State, all kinds of people stepped up. And by the end of July of last year, all 20,000 deeds had been read, indexed, and reviewed. That effort works out to thousands of hours. We estimate over 10,000 hours of donated unpaid labor. That's roughly 5 man-years over the past year to identify, index, and map these deeds. And I want to be very, very clear that our budget was zero. I think this level of response from the community speaks to a real hunger to understand the forces that have shaped us and to use that knowledge going forward to guide us through issues we face in Raleigh and Wake County now. Now, just very quickly about covenants themselves. Racially restrictive covenants are only one item in a whole toolbox of strategies that were used over the years in the U.S. to limit access to capital, property, and generational wealth building for people of color. Zoning, school placement, urban redevelopment, redlining, real estate steering, all were a part of that effort. But today, we are talking only about racially restrictive covenants, clauses inserted in property deeds that explicitly forbid the purchase, ownership, or occupancy of property by persons of color. The first racially restrictive covenant in the U.S. appears in 1843 in Massachusetts in the Linden Place development, the same neck of the woods where many prominent abolitionists like the Grimke sisters and Frederick Douglass lived. So covenants are not unique to Raleigh or Wake County or North Carolina or even the South. They are nationwide. And now, let's look at some of the results of your hard work. First, let's look at an actual deed. This is an image of a deed from 1906. It's for a property being sold by the Glenwood Land Company, which developed Glenwood, Bloomsbury, Hayes Barton, among others. James H. Pugh was one of the founders, the public face of the company, a famous criminal lawyer, a state legislator, a gifted orator, and politically a white supremacist. So here in 1906, we see that Pugh, Glenwood Land Company, is selling Annie Wiggins a house on Blunt Street. The location of the house is described. It's tied to an official map of the city, and Pugh promises the buyer not only the house, but access to an alley. That's also an example of a covenant, just not a racially restrictive one. On the next slide, he also promises her access to the public sewer, and in return, she must promise to install a grease trap in her kitchen sink. Now, the installation of city sewers at this time was being paid for by a citywide assessment with an additional fee for new construction, which Pugh here agrees to pick up for the buyer. But anyway, an assessment is what we would call today a bond issue. Everybody in the city, all the property owners paid into it, but we know from newspaper accounts and oral histories that African-American neighborhoods like Lincoln Park, Idlewild, College Park still did not have city sewer service in 1933, even though they had been paying the same assessment for almost 20 years. So those areas are an example of areas that were grievously underserved, right? And then lastly, we see in this document, as an additional inducement to the buyer to complete the purchase, Glenwood Land Company covenants with the buyer or promises that no pigs or hogs are allowed and no occupation by persons of Negro blood unless they are domestic servants. Also, the deed specifies that these covenants are to run with the land, in other words, to exist in perpetuity. Now, let's look at another covenant from several decades later, one from 1949 for Longview Gardens, which was established by Clarence Poe. Clarence Poe was a man of tremendous energy and ambition. He became editor of the Progressive Farmer at age 18 in 1899 and editor and publisher in 1903, positions he retained until 1954. His editorial stance there was that the agricultural rural South should be an exclusively white space. He had a long and prolific career in many areas of agriculture. He was affiliated with NC State, and indeed a now infamous building on State's campus, the site of a cancer cluster, is named for him. He married one of Governor Charles Aycock's daughters, so he was politically well connected. He also became a real estate developer, betting on land that he purchased to the southeast of Raleigh, Cokefisher Plantation land, to establish his Longview Gardens development. Here in this covenant that appeared in all the deeds for Longview Gardens, he greatly expands the range of unacceptable people he calls not wholly Caucasian. He limits the residents of his development to English, Scotch, Welsh, Irish, French, German, Dutch, Swiss, Belgian, Scandinavian. So that means he's not hospitable to not only people of color, but no Italians, no Spanish, no Greek, no Middle Eastern, no Indians, no one from Mexico or South America, no one who doesn't make his explicit list. In addition, Poe's covenants go on from here to foreshadow problems we see in today's HOA abuses. He sets up a very elaborate and opaque management structure for his development. Anyone in the development can rat out anyone else for perceived violations. And he makes it very difficult to find out where the accusations come from and how you might address it. Now, very satisfyingly, he went bankrupt. His development ran into problems caused by school placement decisions. That's another fascinating rabbit hole. I chose these two deeds to share because they give a sense of some of the themes of the covenants, the language they use, the power players, the evolution of the deeds themselves over time, and how they illustrate the past and its links to the present day as well as the future. Now, reading the deeds, especially at this great volume of them, becomes more like reading a narrative, a novel almost, than just individual documents. Larger historical events are reflected in them: the Great Depression, the World Wars, huge changes in the banking and financial industries, the growth of Raleigh as a city. They give us insights, perspectives, not only on the physical form of the community, but on Raleigh personalities, power brokers, power structures, and power struggles. Now, let's take a look at the map of where these covenanted properties were located in Raleigh. This is a time-lapse map of the placement and extent of covenanted properties in Wake County. The background in green is a current map of Raleigh, a current day map. The 1948 boundary of the city of Raleigh appears in blue. And just so everybody can get oriented, you can see that strong curve of the belt line going around the map. You see the strong north-south line of Glenwood Avenue and the strong east-west axis there of Wade Avenue. At the bottom of the map, you see a date, 1905. We start the map in 1905 before the first covenant. When it starts to play, you'll see the date at the bottom change, and the properties that were covenanted in that year will appear in red. The time frame is about 1 second per year, and the full map takes a little less than a minute. So you'll see it start on Glenwood Avenue with Annie Wiggins and the other houses around her. Okay. World War I is starting. And in the 20s, things really begin to ramp up. Railroads were big here. There was a lot of new money in Raleigh because of the strength of the stock market. Things are booming right up through 1929 and the big crash. And then in the 30s, the map appears to slow a little bit, not because covenants were not being used, but because not much was being built when money was tight. Things don't ramp up again until the World War II years. And then as World War II ends and the soldiers come home from overseas, there's a huge explosion of new construction, all right? When we started talking about the covenants to people, they often asked us, is there a covenant on my house? So we decided that we needed to add a functionality to the map that would help people answer that question. This is a demo now, a demo of how the map will function. The full functionality of the map is dependent on a software update that the county is in the process of starting. But you can start the map, you can choose an area and click on an area that you're interested in, and then you highlight that area, enlarge it to the point where you see individual properties. You can choose an individual property, and when you do, you click on it, a list of deeds associated with that property turn up. It takes you right to an image of the covenant. Here we see in this covenant there is property changing hands from Herring to Medlin. The property is defined, and on the next page, you'll see that actually a number of lots in the development of Sunset Hills are changing times at this moment. Just as before, the property is described, the covenants are laid out, things like setbacks. It's a residential area, 1 house per lot, no noxious or offensive trade. And then finally, in covenant number 5, right, you see no person of Negro blood shall own or occupy, okay, unless they be domestic servants there, right? So there's the covenant, the racial covenant for that. Now, one of the big questions we had when we were starting the project was whether or not the Wake County covenant deeds would bear out the conclusions in works like Crabgrass Frontier and Color of Law about the effect of racially restrictive covenants on generational accumulation of wealth and other issues in communities of color. As powerful as the covenant map is by itself, let's see what we can learn from it when we put it to use and compare it to other geographical data sets. The American Community Survey, what is commonly referred to as a census, tracks something called the Social Vulnerability Index. You see the variables in that index defined on the current slide. It collects data to predict the areas of a community that are most poorly equipped to survive a disaster of some sort, a tornado, a hurricane, a pandemic. Because of their income, education, access to transportation, access to adequate housing, or public services like roads, sewer, stormwater management, support networks. So the SVI index, the Social Vulnerable Index, is a pretty good proxy for where the underprivileged members of a community are located. This is a map from the CDC website using Wake County's social vulnerability data from 2022. The lighter the area on this map, the richer and less vulnerable its residents are. The lightest areas are those with the highest levels of income and education, the best housing, the best access to medical care and public services and transportation, etc. The darkest green areas are the most vulnerable. The residents of these areas have the lowest income, the lowest levels of education, the least access to medical care, transportation, and areas that are underserved in terms of public services like transportation or sewers, like we were talking about earlier. Let's see what happens when we superimpose the covenant data over the SVI data. So today's wealthiest areas of Wake County pretty much match up with the areas that were covenanted over 100 years ago. So here we can see that access to capital guaranteed by the covenants has supported the retention of wealth, the building of generational wealth, and disproportionate access to services over the last 125 years. But here's an interesting exception. The Clarence Poe's Longview Gardens appears as that large red area there in the sort of the lower right-hand corner of the map, and his development, I believe, was tanked by school placement. That's why it's in that underserved area. Now, when difficult conversations begin around some of these issues of race and class and equity, I often hear the phrase, they were just products of their times. But instead, I would argue that we are a product of their times. Dr. William Barber has a phrase, a quote that goes something like, one of the hardest things that we have to do sometimes is to understand that people we loved and people who loved us were wrong, that they lied to us. In his new book, Just Action, Richard Rothstein notes that dialogue around these issues of race and class and equity often falter on the rock of guilt or uneasiness over what beloved ancestors may have done. But they were themselves, and we are us. We do not have to allow ourselves to be bound by feelings of shame or guilt or fear as we try to work together toward remedies for some of the inequities of the past. I alluded earlier to Wake County's story and the power of the covenants to tell us the story of our community in a unique and nuanced way. It really is a different perspective, I think, not part of the usual narrative about Raleigh being a lovely, comfortable place, a beacon of hope and opportunity for the entire state. We can see from the data that for a very long time, issues of race and class have separated us from one another, a result of the white supremacist worldview that mandated absolute separation of the races and was espoused by Wake County's leaders for many, many years. But tonight, we are here to rejoice in our achievement. We brought the receipts. We did it. And tomorrow, let's begin putting the map to work by beginning to sit with it, to understand it, and to use it to help lift the yoke that Pew and Poe and the Lost Causers and all the rest of them placed on all our necks to keep us separated from each other so many years ago. The maps and the data are now accessible on the ROD website. There you can view the maps and download the underlying data. The searchable map demo is there. The fully functional search will be available as soon as the county's software update is complete. We thank you so much for your time. It's been great, and yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank y'all so much.